today we're going to be talking about gender as a social construct, celebrating gender diversity. This is definitely one of the least concrete of our workshops. So thank you for coming along with us as we explore the concept of gender, the history of gender, and how it is being celebrated today. So first, authors, hello, my name is Lily. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the head of the curriculum committee of the Chicago Trans Health Initiative, and am kind of one of the big driving forces behind this workshop. With today's, we're also having, I'm putting my hands here for you,
Yes.
Maya.
Hi, I'm Maya. I use she, her pronouns, and I am part of the curriculum committee and just want to take one tiny second to thank Lily for all of the work that they've done. It's like we truly would not have done this without them. So everyone should clap now or later or both.
Yes, thank you so much. We also want to acknowledge that our friend Kylo helped with some of the slides and sourcing some of our poetry for today. So yes, outline. So every talk needs a good outline. We're going to start with definitions of transness. We kind of covered some of this before, concept of gender euphoria and gender dysphoria, then go into the depths of trans history, social determinants of health for trans folks, intersectionality between race and gender, and then mutual aid. So what does it mean to be trans? We have the APA definition, which I believe I shared with you all at our first workshop. So transgender is an umbrella term for persons whose gender identity, gender expression, or behavior does not conform to that typically associated with the sex to which they were assigned at birth. That's a very medicalized definition, and it doesn't really encompass the whole of one's life experience, but acknowledging that for research, we need definitions for things. It is good enough for research purposes and like generalizability. Now, like going a little bit more depth into like gender, what is gender? So typically sex is defined as whatever chromosomes or whatever parts you are born with, but gender is acknowledged to be fluid. So this is a lovely quote and definition from the sociology of gender. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, gender is a concept that describes how societies determine and manage sex categories, the cultural meanings attached to men's and women's roles, how individuals understand their identities. It involves norms, attitudes, and activities that society deems more appropriate for one sex over another, and is also determined by what an individual feels or does. So this is kind of a more, I think, broad definition of the concept of gender. We'll go a little bit into gender dysphoria and gender euphoria. As a reminder, gender dysphoria is the distress that occurs due to the mismatch in one's own body and their gender. And we really wanted to put people's words, like people's own experiences on here so that it was less of us kind of presenting to you definitions. So we included a lot of poetry and art from folks in the community. So this poem by someone named Avery writes, dysphoria can be defined as a general unease or dissatisfaction, a discontent. But dysphoria feels more like a disconnect. My heartbeat feels more like a defect. When it throbs against my shrinking ribcage, I can feel that it is making a dent. Dysphoria comes from a Greek root meaning hard to bear. It is hard to bear. Shit, it's hard to breathe. Literally, physically, I cannot breathe. I cannot be free. So with this poem, I feel like you can feel like the weight that this person is having with their gender dysphoria and how much it is affecting them. The flip side of that coin is gender euphoria. So that's the powerful feeling of joy and elation that you get from living as yourself. There are a whole bunch of wonderful anthologies celebrating gender euphoria. I picked one little snippet from a short story from the Gender and Euphoria anthology about Oliver Jones, who is a trans man from England who he was voted to be prom king for his year. And with that, like, he didn't have to tell anyone that he was a guy, that he was male. He didn't have, like, he was prom king, and that was it, the entirety of him, of that day. And just having that symbolism of the title the other put upon you was very validating for him. Now I'm going to I recognize I don't have the best poet voice, so I will highlight Max Binder and Mo Christ, this wonderful poet duo, and their poem and presentation. Hopefully this works.
The puppeteers string me up.
My elbows jump.
My wrists hang limp in the air. I'm everything they want me to be.
A girl.
A boy.
Lovely to look at in my black dress.
So handsome in my button-up.
Tights.
Khaki pants.
Purple church shoes with a tiny kitten heel.
Sneakers caked in dirt after sliding at home base. I'm so good at playing the part.
To be girl is to obey. To be soft ceramic tea kettle heavy over wispy blue flames. To be girl is to boil over and evaporate in the same breath. To love and to be loved silently.
To be boy is to get my way. To be a train boring through mountains, tracks paving my manifest destiny. To stand up straight with my hands up first. To be gendered is to answer every question before it is asked.
To ask no questions.
I follow my cues. I say all the right lines.
My body is a hollow instrument carved from broken branches.
Strings wrapped around my lungs, breathing in spite of me.
The puppeteer speaks and my mouth jerks open.
I speak only when I am spoken for. Words coerced but called a gift. Control masked as mimicry.
Shadow of a gender I wish I didn't have to be. It's just so easy to let someone else do the talking.
Obedience is a safer body than mine. His movements are my movements. Run fast.
Walk with back straight.
Legs spread while seated, as if I were just the image in the mirror. And I let it happen. I learned by watching.
Another thread fastening me to womanhood.
Mimicking that which I must perform.
I let my body be sculpted into caricature.
Each tug of the strings bringing a twinge of pain.
I can be a real girl and do what I'm told.
I can be a real boy if it means survival. But when I look in the mirror, I cannot tell if it is my reflection or someone else's.
Gender is a puppet show.
It's ventriloquism, whatever it takes to fool you, and there is no easy escape. Each time you call me he, boy,
she, girl,
I feel you tug the strings. Baggy costumes letting my body escape me.
But I am learning how to become.
How to fight through dysphoria and disobey.
To untangle this body from the girl I was woven into.
Unbuoy my joints from whittled blocks. I snapped the strings that have held me safe but sorry.
They snap back and leave tally mark bruises won for every time I let femininity be replaced by whatever it is I've escaped to.
Change isn't easy when instruction has become reflex. Performance, a nervous habit, the kind that makes my bones stiff.
Not a body.
But a doll on a string. I swallowed the graceful hand of God so that I might breathe this body whole. This is my resurrection. This is magic. This is truth. This is the only way I know how to be. I wish my body didn't need a gender.
I wish I didn't have to be a real boy.
Or a real girl. I wish I didn't have to be real to be allowed to exist.
My body is still far from any kind of home.
It still hurts to breathe too deeply.
To be whole but not yet holy.
Home is a body where you get to be you. No strings attached. Have you ever felt that? Have you?
Gender is a stage.
And we are all fastened to it. Don't be surprised when we break free.
So they did significantly more justice to that poem than I could ever have reading it to you. But I wanted to include this just to like show you what the concept of gender means to different folks and different existences. I think poetry is a great way to kind of get an insight in how people are feeling, and I highly recommend reading more of it. Going from that like emotional poem into something a little bit more ancient history, we'll say. We're going to talk about the existence of trans folks in history. I will acknowledge first that I am not a historian and I am not a religious scholar, so I acknowledge that I am not necessarily the best person to be telling you all of these things, but I also think that it is important to know. So with that acknowledgement aside, I also want to say that it's difficult to characterize history as being transgender or gender diverse, just because the modern concept of gender and transgender is relatively recent. It kind of started existing in the 50s and 60s is when the term transgender was coined. And so you'll hear frequently in the discourse when people talk about the history of transness of like, oh, these people, like they didn't have the word transgender, so therefore trans people or gender diversity didn't exist. But with our modern mindset of the concept of gender diversity, we can kind of look back and see people who seem to exist outside of how we view the binary or express strong desires to change gender. We also want to acknowledge that most of the historical trans and gender diverse people that we know, and honestly, a lot of the LGBT people in history that we know as well, we only really know about because they are forcibly outed either during their life or post-mortem. So this is just the people that society, decided to call out. And there are probably many people who existed who are gender diverse that were not outed, so therefore we do not know about them. So we're going to start like 2,000 years ago. So this is Roman Emperor Elagabalus from 222 AD. She was appointed to be the Roman quote unquote emperor when she was 14 and took to the throne rather quickly. She was assigned male at birth, but regularly wore women's clothing, makeup, demanded to be called empress, and even like put out missives telling people that she was like wanting to get surgery to get a vagina and remove her phallus. She did a lot of interesting things during her very short reign. If you can see up there, it only lasted 4 years. She managed to appoint her grandmother as a senator, who was the first woman senator in the Roman Senate, and really, really valued her grandmother's teaching and advice throughout her whole short rule. Her rule was full of scandals, murder, bad decisions. So she was basically strong-armed into adopting an heir and then killed shortly thereafter, or rather died under suspicious circumstances shortly thereafter so that her heir could take over the throne. It's difficult to get a full account of her short life because not only was it 2,000 years ago, but there seems to be evidence that the Roman Senate at the time was attempting to erase her existence from history, mainly because she was a very contentious ruler and didn't necessarily end her rule in favor, which that tends to happen if you get murdered. Typically not because people like you a whole bunch. Then we'll jump forward about 1,000 years and talk about Ptolemaeus ben Ptolemaeus, who was a Jewish poet and philosopher. This excerpt here on the side, I won't read it, you can read it for yourself, is from On Becoming a Woman, and basically talks a lot about all of the wonderful things that the Lord was able to do, the fact that he was able to create all of creation and do all of these beautiful, wonderful miracles, but didn't make Ptolemaeus a female or a woman. So the whole poem is basically a lament wishing that they were born a different gender than the one they were assigned. Now, jumping forward another 600 years, a little bit more modern history, we have Harry Allen, or Harry Livingston, went under both aliases at different times in his life in the 1880s. So he was born in Indiana and moved to Seattle in the 1890s. Luckily, it seems that Harry Allen had a pretty supportive family, with his mom allowing him to wear masculine clothing, pursue masculine activities. And when he got put in jail for various reasons, his mom would come calling to the jail and use his chosen name of Harry to like see if he was in that jail. While he was alive, he worked as a waiter, a bartender, a bouncer, and was like noticeably like he was noted for being a very skilled boxer. He unfortunately got arrested for bootlegging in 1911, and after his arrest, the police realized that he was assigned female at birth and basically attempted to force him to wear skirts and feminine undergarments. And he continued to get into a lot of trouble with the law around both his bootlegging and the fact that he refused to wear women's clothing. And it got to the point where the press was quite involved in reporting on Harry's exploits. They did misgender Harry throughout, like, all of the newspapers. They used his dead name, which is sad, but mildly understandable in the context of the time. Harry was always insistent that he was a man, took great offense to being called his dead name or being misgendered, which I put in quotes because that wasn't the terminology used at the time. But basically, he got very upset whenever somebody called him a woman, to the point where he would throw things at people. He was a little bit on the like quick to anger, quick to fight side, but he was famously a ladies' man and dated a lot of women, which was also reported on by the newspaper and was considered very scandalous. Next, we're going to go to a famous trans person in medicine. So we'll talk about Alan Hart. So Alan Hart was born, was assigned female at birth, and spent much of their youth as kind of wearing masculine-ish clothing, but eventually went to medical school presenting as female initially. While in medical school, though, he wrote under the pseudonym Robert Allen Bamford, or initialized his names, and spent a lot of time writing in newspapers, novels, formal publications, and even a couple of short stories. He was quite dismayed when his medical school was issued in his dead name, but internal records of the school that he went to, which I believe was Stanford, I might be lying, put AKA Robert L. MD after his name, indicating that they recognized him more as Robert L. than his dead name. As a physician, Allen pioneered the use of X-rays to detect tuberculosis and implemented like widespread TB screening programs that were able to catch a lot of people's TB and get them treatment before they progressed to some of the nastier manifestations of TB. He was the first trans man to get a hysterectomy for gender affirmation in the US and was able to get started on testosterone in 1920. And when he was talking to his psychologist, who like approved him for the surgery, because that's apparently always been a concept, the psychologist did note that he did not believe that Allen was mentally ill, just kind of born with the affliction of being in the wrong body. Unfortunately, halfway through his career, he was forcibly outed by a former classmate, and not everyone had the mindset that being trans was not a sign of mental illness at that time. Again, unfortunately. So he was forced to move and needed to find a new job, but he managed to stay working as a physician in the new area and continued doing a lot of great work with TB. He eventually would go on and talk to medical students. So I have this lovely quote from him that he spoke at a medical student graduation. So if we have anybody who is looking at the tail end of their student career or is just kind of reflecting on things, I highly recommend this quote. I'll read it for you. So Each of us must take into account the raw materials which hereditary dealt us at birth and the opportunities we have had along the way, and then work out for ourselves a sensible evaluation of our personalities and accomplishments. All in all, Alan Hart, amazing human being who did a lot of great work for humanity and saved countless lives with his TB program. Now, with even more modern history, I want to highlight Marsha P. Johnson, who is a name that I hope you know. She was assigned male at birth and basically is most famous for throwing the first brick at Stonewall, which I also hope you know about. If you don't, there's a lot of great documentaries that I suggest you check out. Stonewall was one of the first spontaneous protests and riots about gay rights, and really kind of springboarded the movement into being a more recognized things. She later went on to create a trans right group with Sylvia Riviera called STAR, and helped maintain the house as a refuge for LGBT homeless youth. She met with artists in the day and was considered a person of note at the time. So Marsha is somebody that rightfully should be acknowledged. Now switching to a different topic. So we talked about people who we have proof of existing and lived throughout history in storybooks. And now we have gender variance in religion and mythology. Again, I will say, I am not a religious scholar, and I acknowledge that I'm perhaps not the best person to talk about this, and this could be a whole talk in and of itself, but I want to do it the best justice that I can. So I will share with you a series of gods and mythological beings from across various religions. So I'm going to start with gender variance in the Hindu religion. Ardhanarishvara is a god who is split 50-50 down the half in all of their depictions as half male, half female. This was the merging of the male god Shiva and his consort Parvati, kind of to help her escape some sort of situation that she was in. But once they combined, Shiva realized that he not only was doing this to protect Parvati, but also was recognizing himself in the new whole that he was created. The name can be translated to the Lord whose half is a woman, and kind of represents the unity of opposites, constructive and generative power, and the totality that lies beyond duality. This merging of male and female gods is not a unique thing, and exists in many other Hindu gods. Now to one of, I feel like, the more, at least recent history or recent zeitgeist knowledge of gender fluidity is we're going to talk a little bit about gender fluidity in the Norse religion. This kind of got a little bit of a bump in popularity when talking about Loki with the recent Loki show, but Loki is the Norse god of mischief, famously had shapeshifter powers, and despite commonly being portrayed as male, would be known to adopt female forms. Yes, there is a story that he turns into a mare and as a way to trick a giant, mythological stories, trick a giant to steal his horse for a little bit, and he ends up giving birth to a horse, which shows was pregnant and gave birth. But there wasn't just that story where it was kind of something that was happening around him. There was a different Norse poem called Lokasenna where Loki lived on Earth for 8 years, milking cows, which is a standard, or viewed as a standard feminine task, and gave birth after having sex with a man that she presumably loved. And it was due to that she lived on Earth for that time as a woman. So I have my favorite little Loki-based comic on the side. I love the sibling dynamic there, but we will go on to the Shona religion, which is a Zimbabwean religion. Their creator god Mrari was an androgynous agender god. They were the god of creation, fertility, rain, skies and the earth, light and darkness, and basically controlled the forces of earth and the fortune of political and social events. Most of the depictions that we have of them were written down by Christian missionaries who brought their own patriarchal bent into it and wrote all of the stories and oral histories down describing he, but the Shona people firmly recognized Mari as a gender without gender and definitely not a he. I could not find any old ancient artistic depictions of Mari, and that is possibly due to the fact that they maybe weren't depicted or due to the rampant pillaging and destruction of Zimbabwean cultures by the colonists that invaded. Speaking of the colonists, now we're going to talk a little bit about society beyond the binary. So we talked about individual people, then like more broader concepts that were more widely known. And now we're going to talk about societies that don't just kind of fit into that binary mindset that we have kind of, or not that we necessarily have, but society tends to view things through these days. So we'll talk some about the concept of third genders. So basically, not every society has used the gender binary as we know it today. Third in this context does not necessarily mean strictly 3 genders. It just means beyond the concept of man and woman. Anthropologists have found like 4 or 5 genders in various cultures, so it's not just like a strictly third gender thing. And we do want to acknowledge that different cultures have different terms that should be respected and used by people of their culture. If you see a term and you're like, oh, maybe that's me, it's usually there's a big historical cultural understanding behind these terms. So unless you're of that culture, don't use the other third genders. But the TLDR of this section is other genders and sexualities don't fit into the Western and colonized definitions that were forced upon them. So I'll begin talking about the term two-spirit. So this is a term that was like, yes, it was coined recently in the 1990s, but it was coined as an umbrella term to unify the many different gender identities and expression across many different Indigenous, Native American, First Nation cultures. A lot of these communities they had their own deep histories that were unique and independent, but yet having a term that could describe all of them to give them like a larger voice was found to be very helpful, which is why the term was originally called. While the gender was different across different cultures, typically folks who were two-spirit acted as balance keeper, had religious roles, and they had both a male and a female spirit within them and the ability to see life through both genders. Now I'll talk a little bit about Hiras. So Hiras have been known to be in the world for over 2,000 years. It's in a lot of the Indian subcontinent is where the Hira is typically known to have originated. A notable thing about them is that they tend to leave their home to join a Hira community and will have a religious role where they can bless weddings and births and bring fertility, prosperity and long life. They also have been known to have the power to curse people, but use that power only with great forethought and don't curse people willy-nilly. But there has been some fear about folks due to that. And well, this is slightly out of order, but when the British colonizers came and invaded the Indian subcontinent, they were not happy about the concept of anything beyond the binary gender that they were aware of. So they decided to consider Hira criminal and arrest anyone who may be Hira on site just due to their existence. Despite this, folks persevered, and it didn't completely wipe out the Hira culture. And in 2014, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh officially recognized heroes as the third gender people who deserve equal rights to everyone else, which is amazing. Again, this is a talk that somebody could do a whole history on, but the TLDR is that there are many cultures who have a long history of celebrating genders beyond the binary that we see today from every continent. We have folks in Asia, we have folks in the Middle East, Europe, North America, South America, Oceania. Like, being trans is not a modern Western fad. Trans and gender expansive people have always existed. So I basically just, gave you this history of like 20 minutes of a way to combat the people who just say like, oh, this is just modern Western society. No, they are wrong. Trans people and gender diversity have always existed. Now, a bit of a tone switch from the kind of history of stuff. We're going to go into the modern social inequities and the social determinants of health type picture that folks have to manage. So I made this very, hopefully not too overwhelming graph. It might be too overwhelming, and I apologize for that. I am not a graphic designer. But this is something that highlights some of the social inequities that were found in the 2015 US Trans Survey. I do acknowledge that we talked about some of these briefly before, but we typically had it more in the context of like minority stress and mental health impact. And this is just kind of general social inequities that people face. So, and I wanted to point out with all of these fun little lines that one thing often leads to another. It's not just like these different things that are disparate and don't affect anything else. So unfortunately, trans folks are like significantly more likely to be living in poverty. So I'll start at the poverty side and kind of work around the circle with almost 30% of folks living in poverty, which is more than the national average of 12. This poverty is due to a rather high unemployment rate, which leads us to the little work circle. The unemployment rate is often due to like trans-related job discrimination, with a lot of folks reporting that or being afraid of being out at work or having people be mean to them and more than mean and violent towards them at work, with over 77% of folks needing to take steps to avoid mistreatment at work, which is a shame. Unfortunately, in the society we live in the US, work is also tied to isn't tied to insurance and the healthcare network. So we did discuss that insurance frequently denies a lot of trans-related healthcare, and the high cost of healthcare makes it very difficult for people to get the care that they need. Going directly into healthcare, I'm just going to kind of read a whole bunch of these just because we are all healthcare related, and this kind of goes into the harassment category. But a lot of people did not want to seek a doctor due to fear of harassment. A third who saw a healthcare provider in the past year had a negative experience. And like those negative experiences are, yes, pretty varied and include stuff such as like violence or misgendering or being called delusional in the office, which does happen. This harassment can happen by people who are not just healthcare people. All sorts of authority figures harass trans people, with almost 60% reporting harassment by police. There's the increase in anti-trans laws. I added that bubble. It's not technically from the 2015 US Trans Survey, but this empowers people to view trans people in a political mindset. Unfortunately, when it shouldn't be political, the existence of a person is just a human right. It shouldn't be a political right, but having very loud anti-trans laws empowers people who might not have previously acted on their bigotry to act In addition to the laws and all of that fun stuff, people are harassed in school. 59% of people avoid public restrooms, which lead to increased UTI and kidney infections. And people's family also are a major source of harassment and lead into everything else, with a tenth of people running away from home, an additional 8% getting kicked out of home, 18% having an unsupportive family, and a very high rate of intimate partner violence, with 54% of folks reporting having intimate partner violence. This is compounded with the fact that people can feel afraid to leave their abuser because they don't necessarily have a family to go back to or a safe place, or they might have unstable housing. So if they leave their abuser, they might be homeless, and that comes with its own issues, with a very high rate of mistreatment in shelters, and needing to balance the whole strict genderedness that happens in shelters, where there's typically a men's area and a women's area, and shelters not necessarily respecting people's gender identity when they sort people into those categories. So this is a big graph. I'm sorry how confusing it is. I will send this graph by itself to you in the post-workshop email so that you'll have it. But I just kind of wanted to show you how confusing things are, which does lead to a confusing graph. Apologies.
Yeah, and I will transition hopefully to something a little bit more uplifting. I'm really appreciative of that context, though, as we move into a section where we're going to talk a little bit about intersections of transness and other marginalized identities, and also the ways in which people support each other through different networks of care. But I'm going to start with reading this poem by H. Melt, who Lily pointed out to me today is a Chicago native. So that is fun for those of us who are based here. It's called City of Trans Liberation, after Martine Espada. Where statues of Lou and Sylvia dance in the streets, where no kids are kicked out or run away from home, where nobody asks for ID or our real names, where everybody has a body they believe in, where we can go outside in the daytime without being harassed, where we are taught to love instead of kill ourselves, where Trans Day of Remembrance celebrates those who died of natural causes, where there are no borders between who we were and who we are becoming. I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of transition from this more grim and heavy outline of the current situation into sort of what are people imagining as a possible more radical future that would be the goal. So we also wanted to uplift that Transgender Day of Visibility is at the end of this month, March 31st. So that's a good opportunity to just kind of continue to be aware of and involved in this kind of work moving forward. And then the section is on the intersections of race and gender. We separated it out this way, not to kind of make it othered and its own separate consideration. Obviously, Lily went through a lot of context and history that includes people of different cultures, races, ethnic backgrounds, and we wanted to just kind of give a little bit of an overview of the current thinking, and also groups, both artistic and community organizations, that are made up of trans people of color or that support people with multiple marginalized identities. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the concept of intersectionality, and that is kind of the basis of what we're going to talk about here. So intersectionality is a term coined by the Black feminist thinker Kimberly Crenshaw, and it refers to the facets of identity that interact with each other at different axes of power and oppression. We all have intersectional identities. Some parts of our identities may confer privilege, and some parts of our identities may be parts of historically oppressed groups. So we're going to take a little time at the end of the session for you all to reflect on your intersectional identities and how they might show up in your life. But just as kind of an example, I'll share that I am a mixed race, South Asian and white cis queer woman. And given kind of the histories and context of all of those different identities, I obviously hold privilege in certain spaces and am part of historically oppressed groups in others. So just wanted to kind of share that framework and way of thinking about people, especially as we're thinking about clinical settings where people come from backgrounds that are more complicated than might meet the eye. And then just to talk a little bit about some art and some groups making really beautiful work that is at the intersections of race and gender. Sins Invalid is a disability justice performance art group that celebrates artists with disabilities and prioritizes artists of color as well as people who are LGBT or gender variant, and that have been historically marginalized. And so we put the link here. There are a ton of videos that share different clips of the performances, and I think are really special, especially as we're thinking about the axis of ability, disability as something that impacts a lot of the people that we work with, and arguably all of us. And then we're gonna watch just a quick little clip from a trans Sri Lankan comedian named Dilo. We just wanted to showcase kind of someone bringing humor and lightness to the experience of coming out as trans within a really specific cultural background.
Yeah. Usually when I'm at the comedy clubs and somebody's like, he did this and this and that, and then I come out there and I'm like, hey everyone, and everybody's like, and I call out the straight people. I'm like, yo, I know what y'all thinking. You're thinking, wait, is that a girl who looks like a man? Or a boy who looks better than my man? Do I bash it or fuck it? So, like when people, like after the profiling, when people understand, like, okay, wait, I'm not a man of color in that way. I don't need to, like, the cops don't need to be called type of shit. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Then, like that thing happens, I get stared at so much. Come on, I know y'all trans folks, y'all feel me, y'all get stared at so much, you know what I'm saying? And now, just to let off some steam, I stare at people. Innocent people. I stare at motherfuckers coming to the Trader Joe 12 o'clock midnight in their Snoopy pajamas. I'm like, just kidding, I'm not an asshole. I'm Sri Lankan. Anyway, I'm gonna tell you 3 stories, 3 of my coming out stories. John wanted me. Thank you to the Center for Trans Pride. Thank you to all y'all. I know, and thank you to everybody who came up to the stage who was probably intransparent. And so anyway, so 3 coming out stories. First time I came out as gay. Second time I came out, I had to prove that I was a functioning gay. So I told my mother that I had a girlfriend. And then the 3rd time I came out as trans. I'm gonna tell you all these 3 stories quick, okay? Y'all ready? Ready. Okay. So the first time I came out, it was I was a senior in college, 2 more months to graduate. I get a phone call from my father. Wow, what's going on, huh? Nothing, Appa, what's going on? I wanted to tell you we found 2 men for you. 2 men for me, Appa, what for? You don't know what the hell you're going to do after college. You have to get married. Wait, you're trying to arrange my marriage, Appa? Really? Like, what? No, you know what? Thank you so much. You're so kind. I'm gonna go now. No. What's the problem, huh? There are 2 doctors in North Carolina. No, Appa, really, I'm super good. Thank you so much. No. What? Do you have a boyfriend? No, Appa, I don't have a boyfriend. Then what's the bloody problem? They're brothers. You can pick which one you want. So the guy that have it. Like, no, Appa, I'm fine. What, do you have a girlfriend? Well, what had happened was, what are you trying to tell me, that you're gay? I know you're not gay. Are you gay? But I think you're asking a question you don't really want to know the answer to. No, I know you're not gay. You are not gay. Don't tell me you're gay. I know you're not gay. Are you gay? Yes, Appa, I'm gay. No, you're not gay. That's when phones could click. Anyway, then 2 minutes later, my mother gives me a call. Dilo, Appa just said something. Oh God. Amma, what? Dilo, are you a gay? Yes, Amma, I'm a gay. For how long have you known that you're a gay? Pretty much all my life, Amma. Who else knows that you're a gay? Amma, pretty much everybody but you. How do they know? Amma, have you seen me? Okay, so then it was like a rough time, moved my ass to New York. But in between, I came and I tried to like talk to my parents.
Sorry to end that on a cliffhanger, but just for the sake of time, we wanted to move on. We'll share the link with you if you want to hear the other 2 stories. It ends really sweetly, so I will plug that. And then the third resource we wanted to highlight is called Flamingo Rampant. It's a publisher that produces feminist, racially diverse, LGBTQ positive children's books. And I think just in the current climate where in many places in our country, books are being banned for ridiculous, wild reasons, it's really important to give the young people in our lives the opportunity to see themselves in books. So this is a really great resource if you know young people or if you're working with people who work in schools, that kind of thing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about care networks. Again, this is a topic that we could talk about for a long time, but just going to kind of go over some definitions. This one is from TransCare by Hill Malatino. A resilient care web coheres through consistently foregrounding the realities of burnout and the gendered, raced, and class dynamics that result in the differential distribution of care for those receiving it as well as those giving it. So we wanted to highlight that in many places, people feel that they can't receive care for various reasons, and these care networks are ways that people support each other and themselves through whatever they're able to offer. So we can go to the next slide. We wanted to end by talking a little bit about mutual aid. There are a couple organizations that we highlighted specifically here. The Okra Project and GLITS are 2 of them that support Black, trans, and non-binary and gender non-conforming people. They do material support, so collect funds and redistribute funds to people who are in need, whether that's like housing, healthcare, food, in some cases, getting people the support to medically transition as well. And GLITS also does a lot of advocacy work to try and change policies to support trans people and advocate for healthcare, immigration laws, multiple different efforts that disproportionately impact trans people. And then one other resource that I think is important to highlight is the Trans Lifeline. Many of you may have been at the session on mental health, and this is a really great resource for peer support. It's also notably divested from police, and it's run by and for trans people. So if there are people you encounter who are looking for peer-to-peer support, this is a really, really great option. And then we have a couple book recommendations here that you can just jot down if you're interested. We'll also send them out, but wanted to highlight that there's a wealth of knowledge on care work and mutual aid. And a lot of these concepts, at least for me, have really helped me better understand kind of models of care outside of the traditional healthcare system that we think of.